For the first time in recent history, and possibly ever, the United States is viewed globally as untrustworthy and no longer a team player. Hello again. Welcome to The Ruthless Truth. I am your host, Truth Davis. In this forum, I share opinions, thoughts, truths on a wide variety of topics based on what I believe to be a unique life experience. And you can read more about that in the profile, the notes, or the bio. My intent is to share stories and experiences and hopefully provide some life and career lessons that will assist you on your journey. Please follow me on Instagram at TruthDavis5. Subscribe to the YouTube channel, Ruthless Truth. And there's also a Facebook page, Ruthless Truth. General format, I'll share some initial commentary on current news or just my thoughts. Then I'll have a deeper discussion on one subject, which will be today's truth. And then I like to end with an American history fun fact. Okay, let's get to the news. You know what? I'm not going to spend a lot of time discussing the events in Minneapolis. This is being covered from every possible angle, and I don't know how much more I can add to the conversation. But I'll just say this. Kristi Noem and Stephen Miller are despicable. We're not all stupid. An investigation is underway. And encouragingly, some Republicans are speaking out, criticizing the actions of Homeland Security, and even Fox News rejected the fabricated and bullshit explanation from Kristi Noem. Even the president is now working with the mayor of Minneapolis and the governor of Minnesota in an effort to improve the climate in Minneapolis. So hopefully we've seen the worst of it. So, last week I talked about how January has seen so many major and global news events, and the month is still continuing. I'll be glad to see this month end. But one follow-up from last week. As expected, the United States has decided not to use military force to take ownership of Greenland. NATO ally countries came together in a united and vocal rebuke of the president's statements and threats about Greenland. Not only is the military option off the table, but the president retracted from his previous threats to slap punitive tariffs on NATO countries that did not support him. Thankfully, the panic has subsided. The stock market has recovered from a significant dip, fearful of more volatile outcome. So while that's good news in the short term, my concern is the long-term damage is going to be far worse. Because for the first time in recent history, and possibly ever, the United States is viewed globally as untrustworthy and no longer a team player. In a speech last week, the president spent 2 hours, or nearly 2 hours, insulting foreign leaders and demanding they all be more appreciative of the United States. He questioned the need and benefit of NATO, and it was appalling and embarrassing. And worse, after coming in with such a hard-line position, he quickly recoiled when he realized the European countries refused to cower. I just wish the U.S. Congress would realize that the only way to deal with the bully is to stand up to him. Okay, additional items. So, with the expiration of the Affordable Care Act subsidies, millions of households are now facing their first month of health care premiums that have significantly increased. The households most adversely affected are those who are 400% above the poverty line, which means they no longer qualify for subsidies. And so specifically, these are single households earning more than $62,000 and a family of four earning more than $128,000. So they make too much money to qualify for Medicaid, but they're too young to enroll in Medicare. Many of these Americans are seeing increases of 100 to 300% in their premiums. Some have even seen their health care premiums now exceed their mortgage payment. So millions of Americans now are just going to choose to go without health insurance. Not good. Now, because of the bad press, I'm optimistic Congress will come up with a plan or an option that will lessen the financial pain, and that will happen sometime soon. Also, the U.S. Department of Education recently announced a pause on collection efforts of defaulted student loans. Specifically, they will not be proceeding with wage garnishment and seizure of tax refunds of defaulted borrowers. These efforts were supposed to begin in January 2026, but the department now says it needs more time to develop alternative repayment plans. My take? Again, the White House really doesn't need any more negative headlines, especially when it relates to affordability. I don't expect there will be any significant adverse outcomes or programs until after the midterm elections. So if you have outstanding student loans, now is the time to look for more reasonable repayment options. The situation is changing daily, so just follow the news and stay up to speed. And one final thought. The Academy Award nominations were announced, and the movie Sinners received a record 16 nominations. That's nice. Let's see how many they win. Because remember, the 1985 film, The Color Purple, received 11 nominations and didn't win any. Okay, let's get to today's truth. Today's truth. People who know me or grew up with me were often surprised that I not only survived 30 years of corporate America, but actually thrived. And the reason for the surprise was because I was known to have a fiery, if not confrontational personality. So given all the potential scenarios for conflict, racism, competitiveness, bullying, arguments, ambition, how did I all keep it together and remain professional? Because, the workplace can be a dynamic environment. Different personalities, hidden agendas, interpersonal conflicts, gossip, stereotypes, and more. But I had a few principles I lived by, and one of them was, they may shoot me, but I'm not going to load the gun for them. So, on today's truth, I'm going to share some coping and survival skills that are applicable not only for corporate America, but for any workplace. Okay, let's get started. First, there's a reason it's called work. Don't ever forget that you are there to do a job. You're not there to have fun or increase your social network. You're there to execute the responsibilities and projects assigned to you. Now, of course, there are social interactions, light moments, and you may even have some fun occasionally. That's expected, totally fine. But you want to develop and project a personal brand that exhibits a strong work ethic. Throughout my career, people would often notice and comment that I had no personal items in my office, no degrees on the walls, no photos on the desk. And I would just tell them, this is where I work. I'm not trying to make it more like home. If I want that, then I'll just go home. Okay, next one. And this is an important one. If you don't know the answer to a question, don't guess. Simply say, I don't know, but I will find out. Good employees are eager to respond and impress, whether it's to superiors or to peers. And all of us want to appear knowledgeable and all over it. But the worst thing you can do in this situation is take a guess, or worse yet, give an incorrect answer that has to later be corrected. Saying, I'll find out, indicates you're taking responsibility and you're going to take action. Believe me, not only will this not hurt you, but in most cases, your direct honesty will increase your credibility. Just don't let it happen too often. Okay, next one. Your coworkers are not your friends. You need to resist getting too comfortable at work. And even though you may develop strong, productive working relationships, don't assume everyone has your best interest in mind. Now, don't get me wrong. It's definitely possible to develop true friendships at work. I have a number of former coworkers that I consider close friends for decades, including a former boss. And many married couples met their spouse at work. But these relationships took time and occurred naturally. So my only caution here is don't confuse a friendly person with being a friend. Okay, next one. If you find yourself in an uncomfortable or potentially volatile interaction, just step away from it. Because, conflicts, disagreements, they're going to happen. but it's how you choose to deal with them that will either help or hurt your personal brand and effectiveness. Unfortunately, not everyone at work conducts themselves professionally. I've been in many heated arguments and disagreements at work. Now, I rarely, if ever, become emotional and lose control, but that wasn't always the case for the other party. So when the situation reaches the boiling point, and believe me, you'll know when that is, you can just disarm and de-escalate the conflict with this. We've reached a point where this is no longer a productive conversation, so I'm going to step away for now, and we can continue this at a later time. Now, don't wait for a response or permission or agreement. If it's in person, just leave. And if it's on a phone call, just say goodbye and hang up. Emotions can be strong. And when we're in a state of emotion, we could potentially say something we regret, or worse, is damaging. So don't put yourself in that situation. I was once in an argument with a boss who was known to be a loud bully. I think he actually relished that reputation. But it got to a point where I calmly said, my mom doesn't talk to me that way. My wife doesn't talk to me that way. So I'm definitely not going to take that from you. And I got up and left. Now, after he calmed down, he reached out and we continued the conversation. Now, he didn't apologize, but he knew he was wrong. They usually do. Okay, next one. Don't gossip. Gossiping is bad for several reasons. First, it's unprofessional and it's a bad look. Second, the people receiving the gossip will wonder, well, what do you say about them when they're not around? And finally, and most importantly, you don't know the personal relationships of others at work. I was once working with a new vendor who was putting in a bid for one of my direct mail projects. His skill and intellect did not justify the confidence he exuded, so I was a bit put off. But I didn't share my thoughts with anyone on the team. I simply selected a different vendor for the project. Then I later learned he was the best man at my boss's wedding. I didn't even know they knew each other. So, you never know. My personal rule, I never said anything that I wouldn't want to see in the newspaper the next day. I also realized that as a black man, I couldn't say or do everything my white male counterparts did. I didn't have that luxury. I remember a time some of my male peers were commenting on the appearance of one of our coworkers, and I understood why. I mean, she was tall, blonde, drop dead gorgeous, but you wouldn't have learned it from me. Hey man, did you see Carolyn today? Damn, she's smoking hot. And my response, no, I didn't notice her today. What? Are you blind? I mean, the sweater, the tight skirt, she's killing today. No, I didn't notice anything particular. I guess I really just don't pay that much attention to what people are wearing. Call me paranoid, but I didn't want anyone to ever be able to say that I was checking out the white women at work. Not this black man. Okay, next one. Be humble. Don't overly self-promote, and be sure to recognize others for their contributions when warranted. Now, this doesn't mean you shouldn't ensure you get the proper credit and recognition for your accomplishments. In fact, you need to look out for others who may try to claim credit for your ideas or successes. That said, be careful not to be too much of a self-promoter. If you're putting points up on the scoreboard and you're getting things done, others will notice. And it is far better for others to sing your praises than for you to do it yourself. And when you acknowledge others for their contributions, you display self-confidence and a lack of insecurity. Additionally, going forward, others will want to work with you or for you. Regardless of the next one, regardless of the location or environment, if you are with people from work, you're at work. It's quite common to interact with coworkers outside of the workplace. It could be after work happy hour, the office holiday party, or dinner while on a business trip. Regardless, don't lose sight that people are always observing you and forming opinions. Don't let your guard down. To that end, maintain a 2-drink maximum when out with people from work. Don't share too much personal information. Maintain your brand of a consummate professional. Once I was in Vegas for a business trip. I was in my bed, in my room preparing to go to bed when one of my vice presidents called and said he was coming to pick me up. He was hanging with a high roller and we were going to the VIP section of a club. We arrived, we were escorted to the private room. There was food, drinks, and of course, women, specifically strippers. The women were already paid, so everyone was just invited to have a good time. But I was a C-level executive and the most senior person in the room. And even though we were thousands of miles from the office, again, I was with people from work. So I was at work. Thus, I politely said my goodbyes, went outside and caught a cab and went back to my hotel. I have no idea how the evening progressed after I left, and I never asked about it. Okay, so hopefully these are some tips, some coping techniques for you as you navigate through what sometimes can be a shark-infested environment in your workplace. Okay, so to summarize the survival tips and techniques for work. 1, there's a reason it's called work. Don't forget that. 2, if you don't know the answer to a question, don't guess. Just say, I don't know, I'll find out. 3, your coworkers are not your friends. 4, if you find yourself in an uncomfortable or volatile situation, just step away from it. 5, don't gossip. 6, be humble. Don't overly self-promote and be sure to recognize others for their contributions when warranted. And lastly, regardless of the location or environment, if you are with people from work, you're at work. Now, let's get to today's American History Fun Fact. Okay, today's American History Fun Fact. We've all heard of celebrities who have blown massive fortunes, including Nicolas Cage, who blew $150 million. Mike Tyson, despite earning $300 million in his career, had to file for bankruptcy and at the time was $23 million in debt. Lisa Marie Presley inherited $100 million fortune, but was $10 million in debt at the time of her death in 2023. And there are many, many others. So today's American History Fun Fact is a cautionary tale illustrating no matter how much money you have, you can blow it all if it isn't properly managed. And the best example of this in American history is the story of the Vanderbilt family. Now, the rise of the Vanderbilt dynasty began with Cornelius Vanderbilt, who was born May 27, 1794 in Staten Island, New York. At age 11, he began working on his father's ferry boat. And then in 1810, at age 16, Cornelius dropped out of school to start his own ferry service. He began his business by ferrying freight and passengers between Staten Island and Manhattan. Such was his energy and eagerness in his trade that other captains nearby took to calling him the Commodore in jest. But it was a nickname that stuck with him for the rest of his life. Eventually, he was able to acquire a fleet of ships that supplied government outposts around the city during the War of 1812. And this is where his business really began to take off. From there, he actually sold all of his boats in 1818, and then he went to work as a steamship captain. And by the late 1820s, he was in charge of his own business and quickly became known as an aggressive force, with many of his competitors paying him off simply so they didn't have to compete with him. By 1846, he was a millionaire. Now, in the 1850s, Vanderbilt decided to try his hand at the railroad industry. He bought so much stock in the New York and Harlem Railroad that by 1863, he owned the entire line. Now, around this time, the Commodore brought in his eldest son, William, known to everyone as Billy, to help run the business. And in 1869, Billy was named vice president of New York Central and Hudson River Railroad. In 1877, at age 56, Billy was named president. While not much of a philanthropist, In 1873, Cornelius Vanderbilt did make a $1 million gift that led to the founding of Vanderbilt University. Okay, so to this point, the Vanderbilt family had resided in Staten Island. But in the 1860s, Cornelius built a modest home in the Greenwich Village neighborhood of Manhattan. All right? So Cornelius Vanderbilt died in January 1877 at age 81. And at the time of his death, the Vanderbilt fortune was estimated at $105 million, which would be more than $3 billion in today's dollars, and was by far the largest estate in the world. Cornelius had once said to Billy, quote, "Any fool can make a fortune. It takes a man of brains to hold on to it." So as such, Cornelius left 95% of his estate to Billy and Billy's 4 grandsons. The Commodore's other son and 9 daughters received very little inheritance. The disinherited siblings sued Billy, alleging he had undue influence over the drafting of the Commodore's will. Billy eventually settled with his family, although relative to the size of the estate, they received modest amounts. Still, it made all of them wealthy, and there were no inheritance taxes at that time. So, while the Commodore had always lived modestly, after his death in early 1877, his heirs lost their minds. Drunk on wealth, they began to spend lavishly. They decided to use their fortunes to build the most expansive family enclave seen in New York before or since. Work on 3 sets of Fifth Avenue houses began in 1879. First, Billy built his triple palace, which covered the entire block of Fifth Avenue between 51st and 52nd Street. Other family members soon followed, including Cornelius II, who built a massive 6-story Chateauette mansion at 1 West 57th Street in 1883. In all, the family built 10 mansions in Manhattan before the end of the 19th century. And in addition to the Manhattan properties, the family built an additional 30 mansions spread across Rhode Island, New York, places in the South, and of course the iconic Biltmore estate in Asheville, North Carolina. They also hosted lavish parties in attempts to be accepted by New York society, including a costume ball in 1883 that cost over $6 million in today's dollars. As to the business, Billy continued to build and expand the family empire, and by the time of his death in 1885, he had doubled the size of the family fortune to a value of $200 million, which would be more than $6 billion in today's dollars. However, Billy would be the only Vanderbilt heir who actually increased the family's net worth. Okay, so Billy died in 1885, and despite his father, who had expressed that the fortune should be only passed to one descendant, Billy decided to split the wealth between 3 of his 4 sons, Cornelius, William, Kasson, and George Washington. It is here, in the 3rd generation, where the vast Vanderbilt fortune begins its gradual decline. Coinciding with dividing the wealth came a decrease in furthering the family business and an increase in spending. Until his death in 1899, Cornelius II, who had the largest involvement and interest, he had managed the railroads and continued his father's philanthropic involvements. Now, William Kasson was far less interested in what his family had built. Nevertheless, when Cornelius passed away, he seized control of the empire, Cornelius II. He seized control of the empire and made the decision to bestow management of the railroads upon an outside firm. And from there, he retired and immersed himself in social events, particularly those of the Metropolitan Opera and yacht racing. The youngest brother, George Washington, had by far the least interest in the business, particularly in terms of furthering the enterprise. He spent much of his fortune on building an estate of more than 146,000 acres. From there, the business and fortune went into rapid decline. The business never diversified from railroads, even as the transportation industry greatly expanded with trucks and planes. Still, the family continued to spend money as if it was endless. And by the 1940s, All the Manhattan mansions had been demolished, and many of the inheritance faced bankruptcy. Now, although the New York mansions are all gone, many of the mansions in Newport, Rhode Island still stand and are now historical buildings. So if you're ever in the Newport, Rhode Island area, I highly recommend touring these Gilded Age structures because they are spectacular. Now, the most famous descendant, Gloria Vanderbilt, she received an inheritance that by her 18th birthday was valued at $4 million. However, at the time of her death, she informed her son, Anderson Cooper, that there was no trust fund for him. The money was all gone. You know, this is an astonishing story. This family managed to blow a $6 billion fortune over the course of 3 generations. But please don't miss the lesson here. No matter how much money you have, you can blow it all if you don't manage your fortune, diversify your assets, and maintain reasonable spending limits. Okay, that's all I have for you today on The Ruthless Truth. Thank you so much for listening. Again, follow me on Instagram at TruthDavis5. Subscribe to the YouTube channel, Ruthless Truth. And there's also a Facebook page, Ruthless Truth. Thanks again, and I will talk to all of you soon.